June 20th workshop. Just a few quick announcements about the schedule for today. We will have a two-part workshop today. We will hear a presentation about the June 27th consent agenda item of the declaration. That we have a two-part section. The first part is declaring the possibility of declaring the former Park Elementary as a surplus property. We'll explain what that means in the presentation. The second part of the board's action or possible board action on park is an option agreement between the city and USD 259. This portion of the workshop is scheduled for 45 to 50 minutes with a round robin request from boards and questions from the board. But we will quickly move after that into a 5-minute break where we will start the main portion of our workshop today, which is the facility master plan. And we will go 2 hours on that from 10 a.m. to noon. And at that, just with that announcement, I'll turn it over to the superintendent to tee up the discussion today.
All right, thank you, Stan. Welcome, everybody. As Stan said, the conversation this morning, there won't be any action. It's really for informational purposes for the board and to get any questions answered about two agenda item topics that we decided to table from last meeting that will be on the agenda for next week. And I just want to make sure there's clarity because this is confusing, the processes that we're going through and what exactly it all means. So there will be an agenda item to surplus Park Elementary, which means that the board would take action to say we would like to potentially sell or dispose or do some kind of action with the property. That is required to go to Topeka. So once the board takes action on that, we will send the approval of that to Topeka. This legislation is fairly new. Over the past 2 years that we have to go through this process. Then in Topeka, they have 45 days to choose whether or not they would like to purchase the property as a state. So that's what the surplusing does. That's the only action. That is not a sale. That is not an agreement. The second agenda item is to enter into an option agreement with the City of Wichita that really essentially says we would like to provide you the first opportunity to buy the building if all the terms of the situation are met. So it is not a sale. We are not voting to sell Park Elementary next week. We're voting to enter an agreement with the city to give them essentially the first bite of the apple to purchase the property if they wish, pending any kind of negotiations between us and the board when it comes to the actual sale. So we are not asking the board to take action to sell the building yet. That will come later, and all of this is pending board approval. If the board does not approve the surplusing, then we won't go on to the other agenda item. If the board doesn't approve the agreement with the city, then we won't sell the building or pursue that at all. So the main question that I think has come up from several board members, but also some people in the community, is about the sale price of the building. Why would we sell or propose to sell, enter an agreement to sell this at the dollar price? So I wanted to invite our CFO, Susan Willis, to the podium to explain some of the reasoning and the rationale and even a little bit of the history. So, Susan?
And before Susan starts, we will also have a brief overview from the city today from Troy Anderson, Assistant City Manager of the City of Wichita.
Good morning, President Reeser, Vice President Albert, Superintendent Bielefeld, members of the board. Thank you for inviting me to speak on this topic at your workshop. This issue has come up regarding the $1 proposed offering to the city. And historically, when we've looked at the sale of property, and as you can imagine, like everything we do in the district, it's multi-step, considerations. It can be a little confusing. There has been, the board has always taken the position that we're going to look at more factors than just sales price. That, if we look back even as early as 2000, we look at the number of properties that we've sold, and it's in the 20s. The board has never said sales price is our only consideration. We do look at what is the purpose of that building being sold, who's buying it. There are a number of factors that go into it. So it isn't just looking at that one-time gain on the sale. So I did want to make that isn't usually the only criteria. Now, when the decision is made to sell a property and we are looking at a group of buyers that are interested, then we may look at max sales price as the top criteria, but there might be other considerations that go into it as well. So, and we've sold property for as low as $1. We've sold property as low as $20,000. We've sold property in the $500,000 range. But our typical sales price range is $150,000 to $400,000, because the market for school buildings is not the same market as you experience in other commercial type property. It just has a limited audience, if you will, right? So there are a number of things that our property manager goes through when we're looking at that building sale. Now, in this particular case, the most recent comparable would be probably the sale of the McCormick building. We looked at the McCormick building when we were going through surplus property, right? The surplus that the district isn't using to educate students. So you hadn't declared it as surplus, but we consider it to be kind of off the schedule a little bit. We're not educating students at that particular piece of property. And so when we looked at McCormick and we looked at the amount of dollars that would need to go into that building for safety purposes, for repairs, for deferred maintenance, like, it doesn't make sense for us to put dollars into that building when we're not educating students there. And then we look at the fact that what do we do with it? And we had a group that wanted to make that into continue the McCormick Museum concept. I've got retired teachers. So in this case, where we were saving the operational dollars year over year, and there was a good community purpose that would also continue the history of USD 259, the board made that decision to say, we don't need to make a gain on this sale. We want to do something that's right for the community, that we've already invested, right? It's fully depreciated building, the taxes are well out of that building. Let's provide this at the $1 amount for the community benefit. And that's what we did. So this is a similar situation in that Park as an empty building has a cost to the district. We talked about this when we closed it, that we were going to have immediate labor savings from movement out of that building, but that we would still have to maintain the grounds, right? We would still mow and weed eat and trim trees and keep repairs in place. We'd have to have some utilities. We'd have cameras. Our staff will still need to monitor all the alarm systems and go out there and check on calls. So that building, just sitting vacant, will run on the low end $80,000 to $90,000 a year. On the high end, it could run as high as $150,000, $160,000 a year, depending on if there is vandalism or other issues that come up in that building, or a pipe freezes and breaks, right? I mean, there are things that can happen in that empty building that we may not even know about until someone goes and checks a week later and we have major damage. So there is a cost to that building if we don't do anything. So when we look at our operational dollars and wanting to save those, and then we look at the city of Wichita's need for a building in that area to serve a population that needs support, That's why we said, let's propose something similar to what we did at McCormick.
Thank you, Susan.
Okay, thanks.
I appreciate it. And Susan will be available for questions after Troy's presentation too, if we have specific questions about that. So at this point, Stan, I think we can call Troy Anderson, Assistant City Manager, up, and he's going to give us an overview. So the first piece of kind of what we talked about is about the board's decision to sell or not sell, and now we're going to talk about usage and how the building will be used per the vision of the city. So Troy, thanks for coming today.
Thank you so much for having me out today. Again, my name is Troy Anderson, Assistant City Manager for the City of Wichita. I'm going to run through a couple of slides here. This is the same slide deck that we used at the open house the Saturday previously, as we shared with the community, kind of a little bit of context around what has got us to where we are today. So provide a little bit of background and context, right, real fast. So thank you. The city was the recipient of a HomeARP grant that totaled about $5.5 million. It was part of HUD's HOME program, but at the same time in conjunction with the American Rescue Plan Act, right? So we were the recipient of $5.5 million. As part of that, we put together a group of folks, hired an outside agency to help us walk through an allocation plan of what those $5.5 million HomeARP funds would go towards. And as an evaluation of sort of industry standard best practice around providing care and services for folks who are experiencing homelessness, mental health, substance abuse, a HomeARP allocation plan was developed. That information is available on our city's website, and it really starts to lay out the aspects of a project in which we are trying to achieve, and I'll touch on it here in just a little bit, right? A navigation center, congregate, non-congregate shelter, and housing, right? It's a combination of, as I said, kind of industry standard best practice around how to help folks transition out of homelessness, achieve things like functional net zero as it relates to homelessness, right? More folks coming out of homelessness than are going into homelessness. And we also quickly realized that one of the biggest issues we have in our community is a lack of homelessness infrastructure, is what we call it, right? And that is beds, right? Shelter space. So that was one of the driving factors around sort of this plan, right? But then in that transition, not only providing the infrastructure and the space, right, but providing those wraparound services to help folks transition out of homelessness into housing and ultimately back into, and I've got a slide here in just a minute that kind of helps illustrate that. So we went down the process. We've also hired a development partner. That group is called Petra. They brought along with them a design team, an architect in HFG Architecture, a construction team in McCowan Gordon Construction, and a group, Parker Communities, who has experience in the low-income housing tax credit world. And as we have contracted with that group, one of the first things that we sent them out on was kind of a two-pronged approach. Number one, visit with service providers who are in the space to help understand the size, scale, scope of the infrastructure needs that we need in our community. And then the second thing is to start doing a real estate evaluation. So they started going through that process summer, fall of last year, and as a result, came up with a matrix, identified 6 properties across the region, ranked those based on what we know and understand, again, as far as best practice, industry standard. And as part of that real estate evaluation, they identified a couple of properties. One in particular was West River Plaza, Riverside Hospital. We started going down the path of, we entered into an option agreement with the property owner, and we began to explore whether or not that was going to be a viable option for us. Fast forward to earlier this year, and for a whole host of reasons, that property became exponentially harder. There was a lot of opposition on a number of different fronts, right? And so following the Board of Education's decision on March 4th of this year to shutter the Park Elementary School property, we began to internally talk about whether or not this might be a viable solution as an alternative to that West River Plaza Riverside Hospital site. One of the biggest reasons this site adds a lot of credibility to the solution, right, is just its proximity to other service providers. You can see here on the slide in front of you, there in the center of the image is the Park Elementary School site, and you can see all of the service providers within a mile that are currently today providing services associated with homelessness, mental health, substance abuse. We learned a lot from our emergency winter shelter last year up near 21st and Grove, right? And one of the challenges obviously was where the existing service providers are to getting them to that shelter space. There was a logistic challenge, right, of getting folks back and forth. So there is some real savings associated with, and it resolves a number of logistical challenges associated with finding a shelter that's in close proximity to other service providers. So as we took a little bit deeper dive into whether or not Park Elementary School would kind of achieve the goals and objectives that we're hoping to accomplish, we had our development partner, again, design team, construction team, start to pull together some schematics on whether or not this would actually be a good response to the programs and services that would be provided. So identified the site. You can see Park Elementary School there in the foreground. We went through a little bit of a massing exercise, constructing a building that would support housing there in the background. You can kind of see there a mass of a building there. And again, when we talk about the project as a whole, what we're talking about is a navigation center, congregate shelter, non-congregate shelter, and housing. Park Elementary School, and I'll show you some slides here in just a little bit, right, of some floor plans, would primarily function for the navigation and congregate shelter space. But it's that non-congregate shelter and the housing component, that's where you see the new building there in the background that would need to be constructed in order to kind of balance not only the wraparound services, but the transition into housing. So we took a little bit deeper dive, looked at the site plan, right, began to vision or imagine how even the flow of pedestrian traffic would function on the property, identifying main entrance, how folks could get into shelter space or get into the navigation center to achieve, again, the programs and services. Felt like the site plan was actually sized appropriately for the need that we're looking for in our community. So additionally, and this is something we've been thinking about all along, right? But this is a fairly known design strategy tactic around what's called crime prevention through environmental design, or CPTED, right? This is a pretty standard practice in and around these types of industry sectors. Things like natural access corridors, things like natural surveillance, territoriality, actively supporting and maintenance. These are kind of the concepts under CPTED, where as you start walking through the design of a space and a design of the grounds, right, we can start to reduce crime prevention just in the environmental design, right? And so one of the first ones, natural access corridors, we can control access and we can control movement, right? Providing secured perimeter without actually providing a secured perimeter, right? Through landscaping and through sidewalk design, et cetera, we're being very thoughtful about some of those design features. Similarly, natural surveillance, you want to avoid blind areas, encourage self-monitoring, right? The more eyes there are, the more places that you can see, the safer your environment becomes, not only internally but externally. Territoriality, now where Obviously, we do have to draw hard lines and hard distinctions, right? There are some really great design concepts around, barriers, those fences, those walls, those barriers that clearly delineate, where safety and security is necessary. Additionally, there are some improvements that we're looking at not only on site, right, but within the neighborhood of how can we improve lighting, how can we improve areas not only on site but around the area to help respond to the issues associated with safety and security, right? Oftentimes you'll see a lot of these improvements on campuses, right, university campuses, college campuses, et cetera. So we can glean from that and learn from that and help incorporate some of those design concepts into the site. And then lastly, obviously, maintenance goes a long way, right? So making sure that the environment is clean, well manicured, can also lead to crime prevention, and we're having some really good conversations about baking that into the long-term operation and maintenance expenses. So with that being said, the last two slides I have for you are just two what I call camps. There's two different ideologies out there around how congregate shelter space could and should be designed. So in this particular floor plan that you see before you is what we call a pod or a cluster type of design, right, where you have 5 to 6 to 8 beds that are all sharing facilities, and they create sort of these smaller, more comfortable environments where folks who are experiencing homelessness, mental health, substance abuse, again, can find safety and security, seek those programs and services, and hopefully transition out of homelessness faster. There's some really good research around this type of floor plan design concept. The other floor plan is perhaps the more traditional, right, where you have just large congregate types of bed space, congregate restrooms, congregate showers, so on and so forth, obviously separating men and women. But in this particular design, we may be able to actually achieve more number of beds, but ultimately a lot of the decisions around this will help be decided upon and facilitated by our operator, who will help us understand better what design tactics, what tenant improvements need to be made and really in order to achieve kind of the ultimate goals and objectives. And again, this will be my last slide, is just, this is the kind of the overarching concept, right? This is not intended to be a permanent location for folks to stay, right? This is intended for folks to come into the multi-agency center, to come into the shelter space, depending on where they're at in life, right? To obtain the shelter, to obtain those programs and services that can then transition them into housing and then ultimately be able to re-enter into the market. And so with that being said, I know that there's probably a lot of questions. I'll be more than happy to stand for questions, but just laying out kind of next steps. Obviously, you all are going to take this up on June 27th. City Council's deferred action until July 2nd. And so we're certainly available not only today, but ongoing to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Troy. This will be on the agenda on June 27th. I'm going to start off by withholding any question. I want to process this information for this week, and so I won't have any questions today, but I do want to give the opportunity if any board members have questions today. And I'll start over, since it's in Hazel's district. Oh, and I apologize. I'd like to acknowledge that we appreciate everyone that's in attendance today. Would like to extend a special welcome to the city manager and the 2 council members that are with us today, Council Member Hoheisel, 3, and Glasscock, and I'm sorry. Oh, Maggie's here? Okay, and Council Member Ballard. Thank you for attending. So with that, Hazel, this is in your district, so I'm going to go ahead and lead with you.
Yeah, I really don't have any more questions, as I've been able to meet with several council members and feel that my answers my questions have been answered. Although I do have just one little question about the stay of the homeless people. Is there a maximum number of days that they'll be allowed to stay there, or how they transition in and out?
Yes, so upon immediately entering the facility, right, the goal is to connect these folks with a case manager, right? It's going to be different for every individual, right? Some folks may only need a night. Some folks may need a week, right? Other folks may need 30 to 45 days, right? But there's obviously, as we continue to work with our operator, as we identify that operator, they'll sort of make those ultimate determinations about whether or not it's 30 days, 45 days, 60 days, whatever that is. But ultimately, the goal is as they connect with that case manager, right? The minute they connect with that case manager, the first conversation they're going to start having with them is, what are your housing goals and objectives, with the ultimate goal of getting them into housing as soon as possible.
So the ultimate goal is to connect these people with the multi-services that you have in the building to get them situated and mainstream back in the community. Okay,
Correct.
thank you very
Yes.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Hazel. Diane?
I have no questions at this time.
Melody?
Thank you, Stan. And Troy, I have a kind of a broader question. It has to do with, I think I heard you say service provider. My understanding is that this is a city project, but who will manage it?
So we're actually having some really good conversations with a couple of different groups, right? But you have to remember that this is a multi-agency center, right? Not everybody that comes into the multi-agency center may be experiencing the same, right? Somebody might be experiencing homelessness, somebody might be experiencing mental health. So the more agencies that we have within the facility, the easier it's going to be to connect these folks to the programs and services that they need, right? And so this will be a multi-agency. Now, obviously, there will be an overarching operator, right, that will facilitate sort of subcontracts and making sure that each of those sort of service providers have the space and the programming and the scheduling that they need. There will be shared spaces, right? And so we're having some really good conversations with a number of different groups. And so we are really excited. I don't have that information available to you today, but that information will be forthcoming.
So you do not know at this time who will actually be the overarching manager of this multi-agency facility?
The terms and conditions of those kind of agreements have yet to be negotiated, but again, we're working through having a conversation with a number of different kind of manager groups, property management groups.
Right. The reason why I'm asking this question is because I was wondering if this was a model that we may see across the nation. I don't know which one. And so I would be able to then look at their history, how they were able to work with this type of this type of a multi-agency service provider. And I think that would actually give some comfort to those that are not necessarily looking at it through the eyes of a very productive way and beneficial way to work within our community, or to work with being able to reduce the number of homeless. So that's the reason why. I was wondering if we actually know who is going to overarch, operate, ensure that the contract is being followed, that we're doing the things that need to be done. And they have a history, that we can actually look at.
So I can tell you there's a couple of different sort of best practices out there that we have, right? Number one is obviously Haven for Hope out of San Antonio.
Okay.
They're doing some really great things, have done some really great things around the wraparound service.
Give me the name of that again.
Haven for Hope.
Haven for Hope.
Out of
Okay.
San Antonio. We also have had a lot of conversations with Julie Orlando, who is out of Bergen County, New Jersey, and their housing organization, right, they've achieved some functional net zero, and so we can learn some best practice from them. We're also engaged with the Houston group and a Dallas group. We can get you more specific information around those
I would
organizations.
love to have
Yeah,
that.
absolutely.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you, Melody. Julie?
I want to thank all of you from the City of Wichita for attending and this great presentation. I understand what you're proposing to do here, so thank you for coming. I have no further questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. Kathy?
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you for your presentation. It's the second time I was able to see it. I appreciate the thought that has gone into this by the city, and I'm sure that the questions I'm going to ask, you all have asked them amongst yourselves, but I want your answers to my questions. Mayor Wu said that there is another location being considered. Is that the Riverside Hospital that you spoke about?
Yes, technically, we still have an option on that property. So yes, that's the other facility that we have looked at recently.
And what kind of opposition did you come face to face with that option?
So there has been folks who are even at the state level, right? So we spent a number of visits and time with some of our state legislature representatives, and there were some folks at the state level that were concerned about that particular site. There were service providers that were also concerned about that particular site, right? As I kind of mentioned, we learned from last year's emergency winter shelter that getting folks back and forth from shelter to programs and services was a logistical challenge, right? There's costs associated just with logistics of getting people back and forth. While when we did the original real estate evaluation, this was one of the closest facilities that was identified in our matrix, right? And so we knew and understood that there was going to be some challenges associated with logistics, but again, at that point in time, that was probably the closest facility. And so obviously there were conversations from service providers about how are you going to be able to get folks back and forth between the shelter and other existing service providers who might be more centrally located downtown.
So I'm hearing you say it's transportation conflict.
That was one of the challenges, yes.
Is there a transportation conflict at Park Elementary?
Not necessarily. Those challenges are dramatically reduced, right, because of the close proximity to other service providers. It's also adjacent to public transit routes. In fact, we've started having the conversation with our transit authority, Wichita Transit Authority, right, to understand could there potentially even be a shift in one of the transit routes. You can see on the map there's two transit lines that run north and south along Broadway. And so, could we alter those transit lines to, again, provide immediate front door sort of service, whereas the location over at West River Plaza, we were going to have to really make changes to the bus transit system in order to get folks back and forth.
So is this your only option, Riverside, if Park should not go through?
Obviously, we will continue to work towards a long-term resolution, right? I mean, we've got to do something, right? We've got to do something. We've got to do something different. What we're doing today isn't working. And so obviously, as a community, we are going to continue to strive and try to find an opportunity, whether it's Park Elementary School, whether it's West River Plaza. We will continue to strive for a solution to respond to the infrastructure needs in our community. So yes, we'll continue to evaluate real estate opportunities.
Is the city on a deadline to use the rest of the ARPA funds?
Yes, there is a shot clock on the home ARP funds. I believe they have to be identified by the end of this year and spent by the end of 26. Sorry, 26 and 30, identified by the end of 2026 and spent by 2030. Thank you. Thank you.
And how much will the renovation cost at Park if this should go through? And where will that money come from?
Sure. So part of the reason why we're asking for the option agreement is to give us an opportunity to do that due diligence, right? 259 was gracious enough to kind of get us into the facility once, and we had a quick walkthrough, right? But in order for our design team and our contracting team to kind of get in there and really do a full evaluation, in addition to we're also needing to do an environmental, because some of these dollars are provided to us by HUD, right? And so there's an environmental assessment that needs to be conducted. And so the option agreement just gives us that window of opportunity to do a deeper dive to better identify what exactly those costs are going to be.
Has the neighborhood been vetted thoroughly about this?
So we started engaging the community about 2 weeks ago, right? It was a Wednesday, we started putting out flyers and door hangers to inform them of the Thursday media announcement, and then ultimately that Saturday town hall meeting. We will also have a second town hall meeting this evening from 6 to 8 at the library. I know that the Councilmember Ballard, who represents the district in which this is located, has been actively engaged. There was a Midtown neighborhood meeting earlier this week. And so, yes, we are actively engaging the neighborhood and engaging neighbors on a daily basis.
What kind of feedback have you received from them?
Honestly, surprisingly, there's been a lot of support for this, right? That people know and understand that, again, what we're doing now isn't working. We've got to do something, and we've got to do something different. This model proposes doing something different. We have a lack of infrastructure in our community, and there are folks who are in that place today, right, who are experiencing homelessness, mental health, substance abuse, who are already in these neighborhoods, right? And so we've actually gotten a lot of support from the community. With that being said, there are also some neighbors who are concerned with how this may affect property values, how this may affect safety and security of their neighborhood, those kind of things, right? And so we are absolutely walking through, we're gathering those questions, comments, concerns. We've stood up a website, www.wichita.gov/MAC, M-A-C, and on there, we will continue to push out information about sort of an FAQ. Here's the questions that we've heard, and here are some facts and figures around some of those questions. And so we'll continue to respond to the questions, comments, concerns of the neighborhood, right? But for the most part, we've actually been pleasantly surprised with how supportive the community has been altogether. But obviously, yes, there are some folks who are closest to the location who have concerns over property values, safety, security, and what are the things that the city's going to do to try and respond to that.
I just have 2 more questions.
Yes.
So having said what you've just said about the neighborhood, what's in it for them?
So I think first and foremost, I'll say that for the folks who are in the neighborhood, right, I don't know if I can say this enough, right, that what we're doing today isn't working, right? The numbers of those individuals who are coming into homelessness, who are experiencing mental health, is continuing to rise, right? And just trying to continue to do the same thing we've always done, it isn't working, right? We've got to introduce something new and do something different. There truly is a lack of infrastructure space in our community, so how do we start responding to that? I kind of alluded to this at that Saturday workshop, right? That you can almost see overnight when we closed the emergency winter shelter up at 21st and Grove earlier this spring, April 1st, almost immediately overnight, we have seen a proliferation of encampments, right? Because they don't have anywhere else to go. And so in response to those neighborhoods, right, those folks who are experiencing homelessness, mental health, they're already in our neighborhoods today, right? This is an opportunity to respond to the needs of these individuals, get them into shelter, get them the programs and services they need, and hopefully transition out of those places in which they are today. Number one. Number two, obviously, we are very sensitive to the parents and the families who have been attending Park Elementary School for years, right? And understanding this is going to be a change to them. We want to be sensitive to that. We've had conversations with some of those folks. We're also talking about, are there some community neighborhood improvements, right? There's some folks who are concerned about the impact that this might have on property values, right? So we're talking through the true impacts, right, of if nothing is done and this building continues to be vacant or abandoned, right, that has a negative impact on property values as well, right? Actually having somebody in the building can help offset some of those impacts to property values, right? But what are we doing that's intentional to help make improvements to the community, clean, safe. Maybe there's a neighborhood park that we can invest in, right? And so we're having some really good conversations. Really, it's more about what does that neighborhood and what does that community feel as though is beneficial to help, again, perhaps offset the impact that they may feel.
Have you looked in South Wichita? I understand that Lang Realty had offered the city some property, and the city turned it down. They offered it to them for free. That's less than $1.
So I can tell you there is a property that we've had conversations with Ring. There were actually 2 properties. One property is vacant, undeveloped land out near what they call their One Rise campus, right, which is adjacent to where the State Mental Health Hospital is. And so I'll respond to that maybe in 2 ways on why that particular site didn't score very well on the matrix. Number one is you're dealing with the cost of construction as it relates to renovation of an existing building versus new construction, right? The cost of new construction is exponentially more expensive, number one. And number two, time to delivery is exponentially longer, right? In order to go out and build a new building could take 3 years in order to stand up a new building, right? So that's why the One Rise. And then on the second note, right, is obviously coming back to that logistical challenge, right? Getting folks back and forth between shelter space and the programs and services that existing service providers are offering is a challenge. So that's why the One Rise facility did not score as high, at least for what we're trying to accomplish on this matrix. The other was, there was a site down on South Broadway. It was an existing building, but there were significant expenses associated with renovating that facility, number one. And there were some challenges with, again, logistics of getting folks back and forth. Even though it was along the Broadway corridor and it started to respond better, right, it still wasn't in close proximity to those existing service providers. And there were significant renovation costs that were going to need to be identified because of how large that facility was.
And you had mentioned that there was actually 6 locations that you had, and Riverside, one of them.
Yep.
Is those 2 on South Wichita, 2 more of the 6?
Yeah, I don't have the list in front. We'll be more than happy
Yeah.
to share that with you, and we can kind of show you the 6 sites that we identified and why at that point in time we were pursuing the West River Plaza Riverside Hospital. And you'll notice of those 6, in fact, at that point in time, you'll notice that Park Elementary School was never part of that process because that was being conducted last fall. Park Elementary School didn't really come on our radar until after March when the Board of Education decided to shutter it. So,
Thank you for your time.
yep, thank you.
And thank you, Kathy. Hazel?
I just have a couple of quick questions. You talked about the residents and public safety and property values, but you haven't mentioned anything about the local businesses that surround that area and what their concerns or if they support this project. And then the other question that I would have is, when would you expect to start sheltering individuals and this process would begin? What's the timeline?
Yeah, so I'll respond to the first question about businesses. I can tell you right now, we are already losing businesses, right? All you have to do is drive up and down the Broadway corridor and notice business after business that is already shuttering as a result of the fact that the individuals who are experiencing homelessness, mental health, substance abuse, are already in our neighborhoods, and they're already having an adverse impact on businesses. And so we've actually had a conversation with a couple of businesses actively supporting this, right? In fact, there is a corporate sort of philanthropic conversation that is really beginning to take hold around how can they continue to invest and support the efforts that we're doing, right, to help salvage and continue to stand up those businesses that are within the area, right? The second question around how soon do we plan on, our goal first and foremost is to try and stand up another shelter before this upcoming winter. So call it mid to late November, call it Thanksgiving, right? When we closed the 21st and Grove site earlier this year, right, we knew that we were going to have to come up with some alternative, some solution for a winter shelter for this upcoming winter. And so we've got our design team looking at what would it look like if for whatever reason we go through this process. We enter into the option agreement, we do our due diligence, the environmental comes back positive. We ultimately perhaps maybe get to a purchase and a transfer. Then we know exactly at that point in time, because of the option due diligence period, right, what it would take us to get into the building, make the renovations that may be necessary to stand up, at a minimum, an emergency winter shelter for this upcoming winter season. That's our goal, by mid to late November. Yep.
Thank you. That concludes this portion of the workshop, and we will reconvene at 10 a.m. for the second portion of our workshop on the facility master plan. Thank you for everybody's attention and questions. Thank you, and for the presentation. Now starting, I will turn it over to our superintendent, Kelly Bielefeld, to introduce this topic.
All right, thank you, Stan. Next up, for the next 2 hours, we hope to have a deep dive into the plan. Last board meeting on the 10th, we were inundated with a lot of data and a lot of slides, and so the board has had a chance to process that and look at some of it, and now we have a chance to ask questions specifically about the plan. So just to level set with kind of where we're at and where we're going, back in, I want to say October, we entered into an agreement with Cooperative Strategies, and the overall plan was by the end of June, they would have a recommended master plan to us. So that's what will come before us a week from now, is the Cooperative Strategies recommended plan that we've seen kind of the first draft of. Today, I believe, is the day that the public comment or public survey closes. So the other information that we'll get next week is, what did that public comment tell us, right? So the plan for next week is to really look at how the public comment might have tweaked the plan, and then we're not going to take a vote. We're not going to approve the plan. We're not going to take any action. I think at that point, then we determine as a district what we want to do with the plan. You know, are we all in? Or we want to go, different? Want to go bigger, smaller, whatever that might look like. So I know that the process has been fast, even though October was a while ago. The process has been pretty fast. So I don't want us to feel that, next week we have to have every, I dotted and T crossed. We'll have the plan, and we'll be able to continue to process what that looks like for us in the future. So, but I know for me, and I know for us, we value that public opinion a lot. So we want to wait to really see what the public has said, see what the community has said about the plan. I know you've probably heard from people too, outside of the survey, right? And that's part of what we do as we process that in order to make sure we have the best support of our students in the future as possible. So that's kind of where we're at. So I asked Luke today to come and present, and I think the best format for this, he's going to break down the plan by quadrant, kind of like we did before, but I think the best process for this will be to him to give the overview, and then if we have questions just about that piece, we can ask those questions at that time. And so right now we aren't talking about, kind of the big plan or what does it look like 6 months from now. It's really just making sure, I want you all to be comfortable with what was actually proposed, so that when they come back next week and say, well, we tweaked this or that based on community feedback, we all have a good understanding of that. So that's kind of the primary objective of this time. Depending on how quickly we move, then we can get into some next steps, I think, this morning, as far as, where do we want to take this from here. But obviously not taking any action today, just a conversation, just a Q&A. And then next week, even really, taking the plan, looking at everything that's in it, and then we'll move forward, kind of decide as a board how we want to move forward from there. So,
And Luke, before you start, I just wanted to make a quick announcement. Our 7th board member, Knock Vaughn, is out of town today. He is going to be here a week from today for our special June 27th meeting.
Take it away.
All right, thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. Our consultants are not here today, as you can tell, so today you get me. I've been really involved through this whole process, though, and I'm pretty confident I'll be able to answer all your questions, most of your questions. If any questions that I'm not able to answer today, I will certainly write down and make sure we have answers by the meeting on the 27th. So as Kelly said, I plan to just kind of run through the plan. I think we covered a whole lot of stuff the last board meeting, and it was a lot to digest all in one meeting, so really excited to get into it a little deeper today. I do plan to just kind of run through all the quadrants, and then at the end we'll kind of just get through all the questions, but I do think it's important that we get through the whole plan first, just because the quadrants kind of overlap with some of the actions that we're planning on taking, and then we'll just get to it at the end. So I will get going here. Okay, so starting with the Northeast region, we plan to rebuild on the Adams site, potentially. There are some other sites around there, one in particular, that we don't need to get into, but there is a potential to partner with the city to maybe look at some land that might be available to build Adams on as an alternate site. It's very close, but that is, the last time we talked about the sites and the constrictions around the acreage, Adams and Irving were two that were expressed as very tight sites that would be difficult to rebuild on without having to displace kids. So I do just want to acknowledge that. Adams would be a challenge to rebuild on the site without displacing kids if we don't have that opportunity to build on it on a different location in the same general area. Coleman is another site in the Northeast region that we plan to rebuild. So we would repurpose the existing Coleman, and we would build a new middle school on that site. Really nice thing about the Coleman site is it's nice and big. We've got plenty of space to build something new on there. So we'd like to take advantage of that. We also plan to construct some new athletic fields at the Northeast Magnet High School, and that is to honor a commitment that was made in the past. Isley Magnet, this is really just converting to a K-8. There's really no modifications made to that building under this plan, but it was something that we felt was important to acknowledge as part of it. And I put a new Future Ready Center in the Northeast region just because it would be in that general vicinity, at least what we're calling it as this plan. It would be at East High School, adjacent to that building where the B building currently sits, the Grove campus. But it would be something that would serve all of our student population. So I put it in the Northeast region for the location, but did want to just state that it would serve all of our kids. Okay, now on to the Northwest region. So this one's 2 slides. I'll start with just the rebuilds. The Northwest region is unique, and it's densely populated with schools, some of our older schools that are all kind of our smaller schools in a way. And so I think we focused a little more intentionally on that part of town as part of the plan, just because there's a lot of opportunity for some consolidations and rebuilds and to really kind of make that whole part of town a little bit more efficient with how we operate our buildings. So Black would be one that we rebuild. Irving, as I mentioned earlier, would be one that we rebuild as well. And then McLean would be the third in that part of town. And then as we complete those new builds, the next steps would be to consolidate OK Elementary. And as we consolidate these buildings, we can't say for sure where those students would go in terms of the new builds. Or other existing buildings like Ortiz that I had mentioned on here, or Cloud, just because whatever we decide to do, it will require some boundary redrawing at some point. So can't for sure say where all these kids would go. That would be the next part of the process. But essentially, the OK kids would probably be Black and McLean, which would both be new schools. Pleasant Valley Elementary would be another consolidation. Where those kids would go to Cloud, Ortiz, and McLean. We just put a lot of investment into Cloud recently. Ortiz is another one that's newer, and then McLean would obviously be new, and then Earhart is another local nearby school, the magnet option there. And then Woodland, we would consolidate, and again, you've got Cloud, McLean, and Irving, another new site that would be available for kids. And then Riverside is another nearby option potentially. And lastly, Louverture would be the fourth consolidation in that part of town, which we would have those kids going to Irving, Spate, and Mueller. Okay, the southeast region. We've got Caldwell slated for rebuild, and Christa McCullough, which would become a true K-8. And the plan there would be that with the new middle school on the Coleman site, that the Seltzer kids would feed to that middle school, and they are, as opposed to where they're currently feeding to the Christa McCullough K-8 school, which that transition, when you've got kids that are already in a K-8 building from elementary on into middle, and then you're introducing new kids from an elementary to that K-8 presents some challenges that we think this plan would help rectify. So the plan for the southeast region, there's not any more than that, just because I think what we've done up till now, it's set up well for the population, and there's going to be some growth that we're anticipating in there, but with this plan, it would be something we'd address in probably future steps, that there'd be some additional builds potentially in the southeast part of town, but it's not an immediate need currently. That's why this is what's included for now. The southwest region of town, we would add to Cessna and convert it to a K-8 building and and set up our district to have K-8s geographically spread out throughout town. And then we would rebuild Truesdale. Truesdale is one of our biggest middle schools, and it's a large site to get around. We'd like to configure that, I guess, a little more. We'd like to configure it a little better for the future for those students. Okay, so now on to our alternate and admin sites. So the first one I have on here is to repurpose the Coleman building. We would, the current Coleman building, we kind of envision that being, different pods for these different programs that would go in there. It's well set up for that already. And so we could have space for Chester Lewis in there. And Chester Lewis would be one that we move out of and we consolidate that building. And I'll touch on that a little bit more here in a minute. ISC would be another building that we consolidate, we move out of, and we move them into that Coleman building. And then Gateway is the third that we would look at moving the program over there and consolidating that building. We would like to build a new early childhood center on the Chester Lewis site. The Chester Lewis site is one of our highest FCI score buildings. It's 94%, I think. So it's really past the point of repairs. So we would demo that building, and then we would build the new early childhood development center on that site. And it is close by Little, our current early childhood, and we would consolidate that building, move them over into the newly constructed early childhood center. And then Dunbar could potentially move into that building as well, but doesn't have to be a for sure thing. They could potentially move here to AMAC. That would be something we can figure out later. Repurposing Jardine is another one. We would move the Bryant programming, the Sowers programming, and the Wells programming into that building, and combine all those special day schools into one. And the other part of that plan would potentially, it doesn't have to be, but we could move the Dunlap kids from that current building over into the Bryant building that's vacated. Of these three special day schools, Bryant is in the best condition, and we've put some investments in there recently. So the thought was to try to reuse that building and Dunlap is one. I think the FCI score is in the 80s. So, I know that building serves that population well as well. So that's something we can decide as a leadership team. whether or not that would be in the plan, the final plan. Okay, so just wanted to give a quick summary of what this plan entails, what you just heard. Essentially, we're talking about rebuilding 7 schools, 5 elementary schools, 2 middle schools. Repurposing 3 buildings, that would be 1 elementary school and 2 middle schools. Building 2 new buildings to us, which would be the Early Childhood Center and the FRC building I covered. And then there would be an addition to 1 school, that's Cessna, that would be the K-8. And then we would consolidate 11 buildings as part of step 1. So 4 elementary schools, 5 alternates, and 2 admins. And this is stated a little bit different than the way that we've been publishing it. And that's just because it's the same thing essentially, but the way that our consultants laid it out was, it was more based on cost of building something new. They kind of packaged our rebuilds and our new sites, like our Early Childhood Center and our FRC, as the same thing. And I just wanted to separate those a little bit in your minds to help you kind of understand we're rebuilding these ones, but then there's these others that they're truly kind of new programs, new buildings to our district. This was a question I'd heard about just capacity. We didn't really have the opportunity to touch on this in in the last presentation that the consultants gave, but just want to verify and demonstrate that this plan geographically, as we look at consolidating buildings and building to new, we very intentionally have planned on the capacities accommodating the population of students in each region of town. And so I'm not going to go through all the numbers, but basically, as you can see, we've got our current capacities in each region of town. And this is elementary schools because that's where our biggest part of the plan is. Middle schools, we know we're way underutilized across the board, so really no concern there. But as far as elementary schools goes, we've got our capacities, we have our enrollment numbers, and then I've got in red the resulting capacities in each part of town compared to what our enrollment numbers are. We have plenty to accommodate the students in each part of town. So that's the general overlay of the plan, and we'll get into questions here in a minute, but I wanted to just give you a couple of key reminders because it's been a while. We've been talking about this stuff for a while. And going back to July of last year, we went through what FCI is and what our district FCI is and what we need to be investing in our deferred maintenance and all that in order to keep up. And so I just wanted to remind the board and the public of some of the challenges that we're dealing with in facilities. If we don't do anything and move forward with a plan like this, our deferred maintenance will continue to grow, and by 2033, we anticipate it'll go from the current 1.2 billion, it'll grow up to 3.59 billion, and our FCI scores on average will exceed 100%. And so, I know the $450 million number that's been proposed is high, but going back to the presentation in July, what I had shared was that in order to keep our current FCI score at 53%, on average, we should be investing about $156 million into deferred maintenance per year. And if we want to reduce our FCI score, we should be investing over $200 million per year. So I know $450 million is a lot, but in comparison to what, really, I guess from a facility management standpoint, I'd like to see invested in our facilities, it's really not as much as you might think in comparison. So, last couple of things. This plan, no part of this plan is possible without a bond. We just don't have the capital money to do any part of it. All of our capital goes to addressing deferred maintenance needs like the structural issues and things that we're dealing with currently. It goes towards those things, and there's really not anything available, unfortunately, to do these kinds of things that we'd like to do. If we don't pass a bond, we will still need to consolidate buildings. That's another question I've heard and actually early feedback that I've kind of heard from our consultants on the survey information that we've received, is that is that one of the concerns expressed is that people don't like that this plan includes more consolidations, and so they may not support it because of those consolidations that are involved. But the reality is, because of our funding and where we are, and you all know that reality well, we will have to consolidate buildings regardless. This plan gives us an opportunity to present trade-up options and better options for our students as we make those challenging decisions moving forward. I just want to end on our enrollment declines. They leave us with a pivotal choice, and that's the other piece of that is that I've heard that question too, is your enrollment's going down, why are you wanting money to build new? Well, here's why. We can accept the funding for what it is, and we can just continue cutting resources and building costs to align with that budget reality, or we can build to a better future for our community that not just retains students, but attracts them to us. And that's what this work is all about. That's the mission of it. And I'll conclude on that and open it up to questions.
Thank you, Luke. The timing on this is perfect because I wanted to make sure that board members have plenty of time. We'll do like a round robin. So if you ask a question and think of a different question later on, you're not rushed. So you have time. Yes, Hazel, go ahead. You can start us off again.
Yes, I will. Thank you. I have a couple of questions. You mentioned alternative sites. Is that just with one facility, one building that possibly would have an alternate site?
Let's see. I thought it was 2.
The other one I don't think would be an alternate site. It would.
What's that?
The other one I don't think would be an alternate site. There is the kind of the two properties that we've, and this has not gone anywhere other than just a, hey, what do you think? But Adams is the one that Luke mentioned, and then McLean would be another one.
Oh, sorry, I misunderstood the question. Yeah,
wouldn't-
so an alternate site for Adams, or are you talking about the alternate school
No,
buildings?
you were talking about, you said that we would rebuild on an alternate, for Adams,
Yeah.
an alternate site.
Oh, yeah.
So
yeah.
is that the only school that you're talking about? And if that would happen, would that be property that we would have to purchase?
I think that's yet to be determined. So we would, what we've started, the site that we've started to look at is, some city land. And so I think we would be part of, negotiating with the city on that. And we would be vacating a property, if this were to happen. So it could be a land swap, it could be some sort of other arrangement. So the answer's not no, but not yes either. I think that's yet to be determined. And we're kind of at step 1 of 90 on that. part
Right,
of this.
right.
So I think, again, kind of back to our discussion today, is that even a good idea? Right. I think that's part of what you guys are vetting and deciding is, if you look at the heat map, Adams is one of the places with the most number of kids in our district as far as density goes. It's also one of our oldest buildings with highest FCI score. So I think that data led the consultants to make that recommendation. Again, that's up to the 7 of you to say, yes, I agree with that conclusion, or we want to go a different direction. So.
Okay. You talked about this option. Is there a proposed minimal option as far as the bond goes that we wouldn't be asking for as much? Is there like a cut in half proposal?
Do you
Or
want me
is
to
there-
take that?
Sure.
Yeah, I think, so what we hired the consultants to do was to be honest with us, to give us clear data and feedback, and to make a recommendation, okay? And so that's what they've done. What we now do with that is really up to us. So if it's the will of the board to look at this differently instead of, I know, unfortunately, I feel like one of the things that came out of the meeting on the 10th was $450 million in taxes, right? Those were the headlines. We really need to talk about the plan first. We need to feel good about this plan before we even get to what do we do to fund it, right? Is this plan too big? Is it too much? Is it not enough? I think those are the questions right now we're asking to really dig into, and that's really the intention of today, because it's, rebuild this, close this, move this, shuffle these things here. There's a lot of moving parts to it, so I want to make sure we all feel good about all of that. And some of the theories, right? The theory that we're operating off of is if we have fewer buildings, we can operate more efficiently, right? 11 consolidations, only 4 of those being, elementary schools. That's going to shrink our footprint across the district by quite a bit, and we feel like we can save operational costs through that. Do we all agree that that's a good thing for us to do? In theory, right? I think that's kind of where we're at with the discussion. So once we get kind of the community, and again, we need community feedback too. I think getting the survey back will help us to make those determinations. And then we can decide what we want to do with that. So I think the answer is yes, but not yet, if
Yeah.
that's fair.
Okay,
Does that work?
thank you. Yes,
Okay.
it does. Okay, and then the other thing, I was wondering, you're talking about consolidating buildings, which means that we're going to be closing schools, and you talked about demolition of buildings. What is that an expensive procedure for demolition? Is that all part of the plan? And what does that
Yeah.
look like?
Yeah, great question. We did include costs to demo all the sites that we end up closing, consolidating. We may not end up having to do that, but we did want to make sure we had that cost accounted for in the cost that we presented to the board, just in case it was needed, because that's a commitment we want to make to the public, is we're not going to leave blights behind in communities. So if we have to demo buildings, then we will. Ideally, the next step of this process is going to be starting to engage local partnerships to see, what developers might have plans for in certain parts of town, what the city might have plans for, to where we can strategize as we vacate buildings, that we have really good plans in place for what happens to those buildings as we vacate. But there might be instances where there's not a need, and what we have to do is demo the building, and maybe it turns into a park or something. But that's stuff to be sorted out later.
Okay, that's all I have for now. Thank you.
And Stan, if I can, I want to piggyback on that too, because I've told some of you all this, but probably not everybody. In the next month in July, Dr. Polite will get the Accountability and Equity Committee up and going, like we had talked about last time. Right on the heels of that, I would like to create a building use committee. I've talked to Fabian Armendariz about leading that. So really a community group that would meet quarterly or however often to make some recommendations, decisions, determinations about what we're going to use these properties for, right? We have the 6, school sites that we've closed, and we heard about Park Elementary today. Jardine is part of the plan. So some may be part of things we want to retain as a district, but other pieces, we really need the community and the neighborhoods to work with us on the best usage of these properties. So just so you all know, I think that's a thing we should do as a district, that I plan to put together, and probably have a board representative as part of that, to kind of be the liaison between that group and the board, to update everybody on kind of what's going on and what the conversations are around those. So,
Thank you, Kelly. Diane? Okay, Melody?
Yeah, I'm still actually putting my questions together.
Okay, that's fine. I'll come. Julie?
Yeah, I was the one that wanted the workshop, so when it was first presented, I was like, oh, wow, this is way too much information. It's going to take me a while to digest. But I have spent quite a lot of time going through in great detail your presentation, and so have come to a much better understanding. Luke also was kind enough to answer some of my questions, and so I'm much better informed today than I was first presented, and but I still do have just a few questions of clarification, just to more understand the plan and what we're looking at. So, and I'm just going to go through in order of your presentation, not in order of importance or anything, but on the Northeast region overview, relative to Coleman, it is a great property size, great opportunity to still retain the existing building, but build a new middle school that's more more student-friendly, shall we say. The 3 pods seem to be a great plan relative to repurposing the programs because they each have their individual pod to function in. This may be way early, but what is the thought relative to the layout of the new facility on the site? And that wing that, you know, you got the 3 pods and then the wing that comes out to the east. Are there any plans for that wing? And then, again, secondly, I mean, would the new building go in the track area? I mean, just what, might be way too early. I'm getting into design questions, but just what have you thought any further beyond just repurposing the 3 pods?
Truthfully, not any further than just repurposing the pods. Yeah, but your architect brain is turning, I know. But yeah, we would likely do a new site just north of Coleman. There's those big open fields there, and then the track would be right behind it. But in my mind, that would be the spot. So I don't know that we would be able to incorporate that science wing into the new build, but I'm sure we would utilize it nonetheless. And we can, you know, when we build the new site, we can do the same garden situation that they've got going out there and honor the same magnet themes that they have out there. And so absolutely we would incorporate some really neat design elements to match what they have going on there currently programming wise.
Okay, great, thank you.
Julie, I want to jump in just for a second because I think, again, this is part of what makes it so complicated, right? Part of the Coleman suggestion is about K-8s, even though Coleman will be a regular middle school. We currently have 3 K-8s in the district. All 3 of those K-8s have really a different model for how kids get there. So Horace Mann is a pure magnet, K through 8. Gordon Parks is a magnet just at the middle school level, neighborhood magnet at the elementary. And then CMA is what we might call a pure K-8, but in 6th grade, Seltzer kids come in and join the middle school. So this move of moving Seltzer kids to go to Coleman Middle School would allow CMA to be a pure K-8. The suggestion on the table for Cessna would be Cessna becomes a pure K-8. So pure being, it's the same 4 section all the way up,
Right.
same group of kids for 9 years. And then Isley, we've had some questions about Isley. Isley was built, correct me if I'm wrong on this, was built to be a
As a
K-8.
That's correct.
We have kind of filled Isley with several special education programs. And so I've heard some people from Isley say, where are you going to put a middle school? We're already pretty full. We would relocate some of those special programs that have been placed there to other places. So we have a visually impaired program. We have 2 PBS classrooms, 2 mixed ability classrooms. So that would be part of the plan too. So ultimately, we would have three of the 4 quadrants with a pure K-8 in them after this, and keep Horace Mann and keep Gordon Parks as kind of magnet K-8s. And then, the next iteration of the plan would hopefully get that 4th quadrant, that K-8 in that spot. But we know, and I'll share some research with you that Rob Dixon gave us, but we know K-8s are effective, especially for kids in poverty. There's a lot of urban school districts that have moved more to a K-8 model because the 5 to 6 transition is really challenging, and that's where a lot of kids get lost, so to speak, and fall through the cracks. So in conversations with you all, I believe we have support for increasing the K-8 model. So again, that's another kind of decision point and kind of philosophy of moving this plan forward. Is that a piece that we value, right? Just like I said, do we value, fewer buildings being more efficient? Do we value K-8s? And is that maybe at the top of the list? Hazel had suggested tweaking the plan or shrinking the plan or changing the plan. I think it's important for us to know where you guys feel like these are the priorities, these are the top things, and then these things, if we decide to change the plan, they're what we can live without or put on the next plan or whatever we decide to do. So does that make sense? Okay. Well, I wanted to, the Coleman thing is maybe odd to people but part of the solution of Coleman is allowing CMA to become a pure K-8. So, okay.
Okay, and then Superintendent Bielfeld, you just answered my second question, and that was relative to Isley having a number of small special programs in it. The plan would be to relocate those programs.
Yeah.
Like the hearing impaired, for example, I had a comment from a parent regarding that program.
Yes, yeah, and we would probably, and this isn't, decided, but probably starting in 25, 26, just add a grade level each year, right? So that the fifth graders this year would be able to stay in sixth grade, and just, so that transition of those programs would probably be also staggered over time. But, we also, one of the things I believe we should look at in programs that are pretty heavy on transportation. Pretty much every kid that's in the hearing impaired program gets transported there. We have kids that live in the south part of town that ride a bus for 45 minutes to get all the way up north. Maybe we put that more central in the community or right off the highway, and we save time for kids on the bus and transportation costs. So I'm just trying to be efficient instead of putting some of those specialized programs clear on the fringes, to maybe put them more somewhere, I don't know where, I'm not committing to where, but just somewhere more accessible for kids and families. I think it might be better. So,
Excellent, thank you. Next question, all of the rebuilds, so I'm on the Northwest Region page, and 3 of the rebuilds are listed there. All of the rebuilds you're proposing as 4-section elementary schools.
Correct.
Yeah,
Yep.
I assumed that because we know that's what the most efficient model is for elementary schools, so I figured when we were building new, we'd be building to the most efficient model, but it wasn't ever really stated anywhere, just wanted to clarify that. My next question, really comment, is on your capacity impact page. And thank you for addressing my question relative to capacities. And you emphasized that we had plenty in each quadrant to accommodate the needs. But I guess my concern more was, and I see you've addressed that as well, and that is, I was more interested in that with this plan, are we reducing our capacity based on our financial concerns that we are not utilizing our facilities ideally. And so I'm glad to see that in each one of these, that the resulting capacity is more in line with the enrollment in that quadrant of the city. And yes, there is plenty of capacity. We're not going to have too little space, but we're also going to be closer to a more appropriate utilization of the available building space with our enrollment. So, did that make sense? Okay.
That's exactly right. We were very intentional about reducing capacity, but not being overly aggressive with it to where we would create a problem, right? To where we didn't have enough space for kids. And we're anticipating, hoping for some growth in the future too, as people see the plan come together and move into our districts. And so we left some space for that growth to happen as well.
And then just one other question, and that is relative to moving Dunlap to Bryant. I realize that Dunlap has a worse FCI score than Bryant does, and it's a little bit older building. But you did mention in your presentation that the current facility is accommodating that population quite well, which I agree with that. I think it is, and I know some of the area is specifically designed for the part of that program that prepares the students to have occupations once they leave and are trained. But is there any specific requests from administration that prompted, beyond just facility issues, beyond maintenance needs and that sort of thing. Was there any administrative request or concern with the current facility of that program that prompted that? I mean, I know it's just a very small detail in the plan,
no, yeah.
probably one of the smallest dollars in the whole list, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate the question. There was not. It was more just, hey, you know, this FCI score is high. Bryant is one we're looking at vacating, so it would be, you know, that might be a good opportunity there. We also heard from our community listening sessions that that community, the community that around Bryant and Hadley, they didn't like that Bryant sat vacant for a few years before we actually did something with it. And so we heard that, and we were trying to make sure we did something with Bryant if we're going to move those kids out of there. And so regardless, we want to make sure we have a good plan for Bryant if we move those kids out. But it certainly doesn't have to happen at Dunlap if there's not a desire for it.
Yeah, I guess that'd be one that I'd say we could take off the table personally. But anyway, and then my last comment is, you know, you, Superintendent Bielefeld, addressed the fact that we don't have to settle on the $450 million. You know, that it's up to the board. We might want to do less than that. But I want to clarify what my understanding and assumption is the consulting firms kind of used that dollar amount as a target because that is a potential number of the maximum of what if the public chose to approve a bond issue, that is the maximum number we could have and not require an increase in taxes.
Yes,
Mill levy.
that is true, and that's the assumption. I mean, we provided them with some of that guidance, right? That, you know, hearing the will of you guys, you know, if we are going to take an issue to the voters, we didn't feel like it could be successful if it was a tax increase.
Right.
So the most, I mean, you know the numbers they've been giving us, though, right? I mean, I think the needs exceed even 450 million.
Absolutely right. Yes.
But that was the starting point of what we gave them.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
yep.
yeah. And again, I just wanted to, since the article said tax increase, we could even, if the voters approved it and the board decided to go that direction, we could even do that much without a tax increase.
That's right. That's right.
And let's be clear, we're talking increase or decrease in mill levy, not taxes.
Yeah, I'm sorry, which
We all make that.
equals tax increase.
Yeah, yeah. I just wanted to make sure we're
It
clear on that.
equals more dollars that one pay if we have a mill levy increase, which would not be required. Yeah.
My concern with going with a scaled back option would be that we've created a really nice balance in our portfolio and how we're approaching step one of the master plan. And so in order to bring that down, we would have to pull something out or a few things out. And that's going to make it feel a little lopsided in certain parts of town. And so we will certainly honor whatever the board desires there, but I'd be remiss if I didn't express that concern.
Thank you, Julie. Kathy?
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for making that very, very understandable for me. You broke it down in the chunks, and that was great. Now, if you can take it one step further, for example, the first page where you said the Northeast Region overview, this may sound very elementary. How much is it going to cost just to rebuild Adams?
I think the plug numbers we had in our budget for elementaries was somewhere around 30 million, something like that. I know Jeff's in the crowd here. Does that sound about right, Jeff? Yeah, something like 30
So 30
million.
million for each elementary school that we either rebuild or demo and build a new one, right?
Yep.
And how long does it take to build a new building? Because the city manager just said 3 years.
Yeah, so design, I know our designers usually like to have a year if they can get it to design. It doesn't always happen, But you know, you account for design and then your construction schedule. Between those two things, you're generally looking at 2.5 to 3 years from start to finish. Yeah.
So if this board votes yes for this next week and it gets on the ballot for the bond issue and the community says yes, we're looking at 2027, 28 before construction begins.
No, not necessarily. My goal would be to start breaking ground sometime, you know, well, it would depend. But at the very latest, my preference would be to start breaking ground by 2026.
And between now and then, we're still going to be having the same issues that we're trying to get away from.
Yes and
Okay,
no.
okay,
Y-
that's
yeah,
all I needed.
yes
Okay.
and no.
Another question I have is if we're moving toward K through 8 in all of these consolidations, couldn't we begin those efforts before construction?
And that's why I said yes and no, because yes, some of these things we could start sooner, especially the shuffling of programs. You know, Jardine is vacant. If that was part of what we want to move, we could prioritize that and start even staggering some of those moves where we move Sowers first, and I'm just making that up. But
And that would be without a bond.
there would be cost associated to doing that. So
Is it costs that the district can absorb, or are these costs that we are going to need to ask for?
well, I'm gonna channel Susan Willis here.
Susan.
No. It's a choice we make, right?
Okay.
And I did want to bring that up, and I think because another question I've heard from the community a few times is, well, why haven't you been using capital dollars for deferred maintenance, right? Why aren't you fixing the stuff that you need to fix? The short answer is there's not enough money to fix the stuff, but you all have also prioritized secured entrances. So secured entrances are not deferred maintenance, right? We've chosen to spend less on deferred maintenance so that we can fund secured entrances. That's a choice we've made. So were we able to do that without a bond issue? Yes, but does that have consequences because the total number of dollars we have isn't enough to keep up? Yes, that also has consequences, and other things don't get done. So
Okay.
that's why it's a yes and a no, if that makes sense.
One of my questions here, and thank you for addressing that in these, was do we have a contingency plan if no bond? And you have it here clearly stated. This plan is not possible without a bond. I say change the plan. Change the plan. Tweak it like Hazel said. Trim it down if you can. Why do we have to do this in so many big chunks? I know you say, well, it looks lopsided. I don't care what it looks like. I care about doing it in an affordable way. And I say we're not going to raise taxes. That's what I'm hearing you say with the bond issue. But how much was the bond for 2008?
I have it here. 08 was 370 million.
And when is that due to be paid off?
That I do not know.
29, I believe.
2029. Okay. And was the full amount of the bond used for the purpose intent?
I believe so.
And was there any money left over?
I don't believe so. Okay, no.
Okay, I'm going to really dive deep now. May I have an audit of the 08 budget?
Of the
I
08
mean,
bond,
bond, yes.
I would imagine we can get that.
That would be great.
I do want to make sure we get all questions answered about this plan.
Okay.
Figured out too.
Well-
So if there's any more questions about the plan.
But this is the plan right here. It was on this paper here. So I'm sticking to this paper here.
Okay.
Okay,
yeah.
because he specifically said it here. I think the plan is great. I just don't think it's affordable right now. I think the timing is off. I think if we can begin to do some of this plan without asking the community for a bond right now, because you say, well, it's not going to raise taxes. Actually, it will. You're actually asking the community to extend the 2008 bond issue right now, which means, well, they're not going to feel anything. Well, think about in 2029, when this 08 bond issue is done, their taxes are going to come down. But then we're going to say, oh, but we want some more money. So it's just going to come back up where you were. You really won't feel it. But on the other hand, we have 3 mill levies, don't we, Kelly? We have 3 mills, right?
4.
4 of them. And so we can adjust the other 3 to where if we do ask for this, or will it continue to be an extension, or will it be a whole new one where they're going to feel the dip?
Well, so to rewind just a second, I do think kind of step one is, are we good with the plan? And you said, I mean, I know you said you like the plan. We're getting kind of to step two of how do we fund the plan.
Okay. I'm sorry, I was
no,
just
no, no, it's-
reading from his presentation.
It's absolutely relevant. I'm not saying it's off topic. I'm just saying that next week, Susan will have her kind of opening revenue neutral rate discussion with you guys. We'll talk about all the mill, not just the bond and interest mill rate. We'll talk about all three. So
Okay. Okay.
Luke is, I'm not to offend Luke, but Luke's probably a little less able to answer these questions
Okay.
than Susan.
Not offended at all.
Okay. So
Okay.
next week, I think you'll
Okay.
be able to answer all of these questions. if
Okay,
that's
so I do
fair.
have a few more questions
Okay.
about the plan.
Yeah.
Caldwell, when you say rebuild for next to your schools, is that on site or is that tear it down and rebuild it from the top on the site or a different site?
We have quite a bit of land out here, so we would probably build something new adjacent to the existing Caldwell, and then Caldwell would eventually come down. If
Okay,
it's
so
not
the
repurposed for
kids
something
could
else.
still be attending school at the old building while the new
Right.
building's going up. The transition blows my mind. So without inconveniencing these kids, are there a majority of the buildings that can be constructed while they are still attending in their school?
Yeah, that's been one of the biggest goals. You know, Irving and potentially Adams are the only exceptions, but even there, I don't know, we can sometimes get creative with some things. So, yeah, I mean, the intent is to keep kids in their home building until we have the new space ready for them, and then move them in.
Okay, and has the consultant firm been paid their money?
Portion of it, they haven't been paid all of it.
And are we at a point where we can say thank you, goodbye? And just take?
We can do that anytime we want with anybody.
I mean, basically, they've given us the recommendation. Now it's up to us to tweak it, to work it, to eliminate, to add, correct?
Yeah,
Okay.
and if you remember, pretty
Yeah.
much every time Cooperative Strategies is presented, they end with that slide of kind of the stair steps of their timeline,
Mm-hmm.
and June was the end, and June was when they deliver. I mean,
Right.
that's what we
Okay.
pay them to do, is deliver this
So we
plan.
can say bye-bye to them. Another question I have is, okay, so we have used our capital funds for our security issues in our buildings, which I do believe is a priority for our staff and for the students that enter the building. Now that we've done that, gosh, I lost my train of thought. I'm sorry, now that we've done that, what are we going to do in the future to avoid this problem from happening again? The
Define-
deferred maintenance. Are
define
we
the-
going to be able to afford to maintain these buildings once they all go up?
In theory, if we do step one of the plan, I'm trying to make sure I understand your question.
Okay.
If we do step one of the plan, are we going to be able to maintain those buildings? Is that what you're asking?
Well, we're in this bind because we used the money for something else. So is there a way that we can have a fund set aside for security issue, the security for the buildings, or if they need new windows? I mean, I know that's, what I'm trying to say is
Yeah.
I don't want to be put in this position again. If the buildings are all maintained the way that they need to be maintained, we might not be in this much of a crunch right now.
So,
Does
yeah,
that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
I think.
It's like stop putting Band-Aids on it and fix it.
I think that as we've had Susan's presentations about the mill rate for capital outlay, I think she's made it pretty clear that that is not enough money to keep up, right? And that's not even the way the state school finance structure is set up, right? The capital money will never be enough
Okay.
to maintain all the buildings. Right, and we've been talking recently, think of changes over the past, 20, well, let's say since 2008. We're up to, I think, 36% of our capital outlay funds that go toward technology. Well, in 2008, we weren't spending nearly that much on technology. That's been a priority of the board. It's, wireless networking, all that kind of stuff. We spend capital money on that. Every decision we make to spend capital money on something other than deferred maintenance takes out of that pot. So, I don't know if that answered your question or getting
It
close.
does.
So, okay.
It does answer it.
Okay,
Thank you.
that's a good question.
Thank you, Kathy. Luke, it appears that we're leaving a little more room for capacity in the northeast and southeast quad. Is that correct, since this is the two quads that have the most new housing?
Yeah, that would be correct.
Okay. I figured that was an easy answer. And I apologize if it looked like I was playing on my phone. I had another question that I wrote down on my phone, and I had it worded exactly the way I wanted, and of course now I can't find it. But I'm going to try to recreate it. Looking at the overall theme of what we are trying to do, and this may be a Kelly question, but the analogy I've been using to people who have contacted me about this is we are a school district built for the baby boomers, where you put a school building on almost every corner. And if you look through the history of the school district, not only did we do school closings in 2024, but there was school closings. You can periodically see where we close buildings once a decade, it appears. We're still probably at an overcapacity, and it almost feels like when I first moved to Wichita in 1970, there was a growth among Quick Trips, not to give them free advertisement, but there was a Quick Trip on every corner, and that was their business model. And now they have had to adjust to fewer buildings, bigger facilities that meet the needs of their customers at that time. Is that what we are trying to do here, is adjust to a shift from a school district built for an overabundance, overcrowding of baby boomers to I hate to use the word lean, but a smaller population that has more unique goals that meet 20, 24, 25, and if we want to look even further, what our needs might be in the next decade. Am I on the right track there, or am I telling the people who ask me these questions, is that analogy even close?
I mean, I think you said it well. Yeah, I guess there's quite a few considerations that could go into it. Things just cost more now than they did back. I mean, for one thing, we're not a growing district like we once were, I'm sure back then. But yeah, things cost more. What we put into our buildings, what we have to maintain. It's kind of like with technology, right? We've now got a phone. We've got our.
We need, yeah.
Yeah, there's just more costs that go into operating our buildings, and it's harder to operate a lot of buildings. We can provide as high quality of a product in a newer building, a larger building, a better product ultimately that, as you said, maybe gets lean. I guess you could look at it, but I like to think of it more as just moving with the times and providing what society needs in today's day and age.
And I like the fact that the consolidation efforts are still hitting administration at a higher level than the traditional elementary school level. And the neighborhood schools that are at capacity and are functioning, and there's a great need for, that they are still in our future. So we're not just closing neighborhood schools just because they're a neighborhood school. There's a metrics behind it, and I like that this plan has at least given us a really good starting point, and I think it's the job of this board at this point is to turn this from a consultant plan into a unique Wichita plan, and I look forward to the ongoing discussion.
So, and I want to piggyback on something Stan said, because I do think it's Over the 155 years, we've had to make a lot of choices as a district, and things have changed and everything else. But if you look at the particular northwest area of town, where they talked about the triangle, you know, the McLean, Irving, Black Triangle, and you think about when those schools were built, when that neighborhood exploded, right? My in-laws lived there. My wife was part of that explosion with a large number of kids. And you think of the density of elementary schools in that area, where Bryant and Emerson, which is now Gateway, and Black and OK and Woodland, and Irving and Cloud, there's a lot of elementary schools in that area. And so as generations have passed, things have changed. There's not as many kids living under a lot of those roofs. So that's part of, I mean, I think it's a really good point that the baby boom created that need, and it's also now waned the other direction. But you look over the history of the school, and I think every school board is challenged with adapting to a dynamic Wichita, right? There was a period in time where Caldwell Elementary had over 1,000 students. We built 5 high schools in 8 years, from 1953 to 1961. Can you imagine building 5 high schools in 8 years? I think it's hard because change is hard for all of us, but it is the reality that we are going to continue to see Wichita evolve and need to make decisions about schools and places and locations and all of the things that we're up against. And I do agree with Luke. I believe we can do it better. We can meet parents and community expectations better by investing in some of the proposals that we have here in the buildings that we could do. So I think it could be a better economic output, a better economic model, and ultimately better student outcomes, in my opinion, if we were to invest in this way. But change is hard, and there's, the next board 20 years from now is going to have their own challenges and their own decisions to make, just like we do today. So.
Okay, we'll ask Diane and Melody if they had questions, and then we'll go a second round to see if anybody has a follow-up questions, and then we'll conclude with Kelly going over basically what comes next. So Melody? Oh, I'm sorry.
I was going to say, it looked like Diane was perched and ready. This conversation is the best conversation that I've had so far on this topic, because we're making it personal. It is coming down to actually listening to what matters to each of us and what we believe is going to matter most to our community. So I'm really enjoying hearing the background, the kind of the passion that we all have for our district. I'm a proud boomer. I'll admit it. I mean,
I am too.
I'm a proud boomer. Maybe the only, yes, obviously I'm in good company. But with that, and in fact, I graduated from Wichita Southeast at the height. It was 1974, so our graduating class was 700 plus. Yeah, and I'm thinking now it's like at 400. And I think our districts, at that time, we had an enrollment of close to 60,000. So there you have it. There you have, it's right there. This is a very hard decision for us to make, because we treasure our smaller schools. We treasure our community schools. We treasure those schools that were on the corner in your neighborhood that you walk to. I'm a part of that. But times change, and that's what I've had to come to the realization of. I didn't start here, not at all. I wanted to keep my neighborhood school, Little Elementary. I wanted to keep what was Matheson, and it became Northeast Magnet, and now it's Chester I. Lewis, and now it's going to be demolished and become Little. Not Little, but a learning center, early childhood. So those are just my experiences. But as I look at the plans and I look at the numbers and I look across the years of how we've navigated budgets from a district perspective, and that capital expenses, you can only do as much as your budget allows you to do, and we won't always have, and I don't know if it will ever happen again, have that influx of $200+ million where we can actually build the secure entries, because I think we used ESSER dollars for that. I know we
I don't know
called
the
it,
answer.
It was capital. It came out
was
of our
capital.
capital that, yeah, again,
but did
it's
we?
the decisions you make.
Yeah.
That's money that goes towards deferred maintenance usually, but
Right, I was gonna say,
Yeah.
so, I mean, it's, what do we call it, 6 on one hand and half a dozen on the other, because it's still the same, but, I mean, we can call it whatever we want. So having said that, I do have some questions, but I just want the public to know that that's my thinking, and it's not gonna be easy as we move this forward, but there's definitely reasons why we need to do things differently, because the landscape has changed. And we have to be able to correctly project our budgets, and then we have to be able to meet those budgets. So, question, what will happen? What are the plans for OK Elementary, PV, Woodland, and Louverture? Because I don't think we're not repurposing those buildings, do we? And I know there's a committee that's coming up, but we're going to end up making that decision. What are going to be some suggestions of what we're going to do with these excess buildings?
yeah, that's the. Do you want to go ahead?
No, I was gonna call on you. I'll follow you up.
Okay. Yeah, that's yet to be determined. There are a number of folks that have done some really neat things with our old buildings that have already reached out and expressed interest in repurposing them for like art studios and apartments and things. The Field Elementary site is one that we're bringing to the board on the 27th, I believe it is. But that one is one, we got a nice offer for someone that wants to repurpose that building and then build new apartments as well on the land. So, ideally, it's that kind of thing. But, yeah.
And I would just piggyback on that. The one thing that and throughout this process that I've learned a lot, or thought a lot about that I hadn't thought much about before, was about kind of site and acreage and some of those kinds of things. So, the location of OK right there on West Street isn't in conjunction with anything else, but PVE is right next to PV Middle, and so that could be, we could have different choices to make because of the acreage in the site and some of those kinds of things too. So I know that's a complete non-answer, right? I didn't really answer your question at all, but I do think it's a site-by-site decision almost, right? Louverture is in a whole different space than Woodland, which is in the middle, literally in the middle of a neighborhood. So
Literally.
yeah.
Okay, so, and now I have a better understanding of why it's going to work to move sixth graders, I think it was sixth grade Seltzer students, to Coleman.
Yeah, when they graduate or get out of Seltzer, they would go to
Right, so
Coleman,
that
yeah.
we can make Krista McCullough a true K-8 magnet. And I agree with the concept. I agree with, the data shows that we're an urban district. We are a district that has some challenges in terms of families with need, and therefore K-8 is a positive move for our district to make, and I'm looking forward to us adding those. It's going to be a change, but I'm looking forward to continuing this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Melody. Diane?
Thank you, Luke, for being here. My top concern, since we're the Board of Education, is always bring the focus back on academic achievement. And Kelly spoke last time we met about kind of the vision of the classroom, the learning environments, of the new facilities that are being proposed here. And so I don't want to lose sight of that aspect of it, because this board has expressed a deep desire to stay committed to increasing academic achievement. And so how are we going to do that? And so I like the plan that addresses that. So if we're talking about the plan and what we like and what we don't like, that part of the plan I really like and support. But then we also have to balance that with fiscal responsibility. And there's never enough money. My household doesn't have enough money for everything that I want and hope and dream to have. So that's just the reality of the situation that we're in. And so, Kelly, I would like you to speak on how are we being fiscally responsible with the dollars that we have right now, so that way the public knows kind of what the plans are, what we're doing as a district to address the fiscal responsibility wants and desires that people have. So where are we at with that right now? And then maybe you can roll that into how we would be fiscally responsible if a potential bond issue is sent to the voters and what we would do after that.
Sure. I think, I think that's relevant in so many ways, right? The conversations that we've been having since probably November, I guess, but really in the heat of, the school closures, the phase 2 decisions that we made, were extremely challenging, were impactful to kids and to families. And we talked about then kind of phase 3. And when we got to the phase 3 discussion, we talked about a commitment that I had made for next year, so fiscal year 25, to continue looking at cuts outside of schools, right? So non-attendance centers. Sometimes we call that administrative. Most of the people that work at AMAC are not administrators, right? They're not. So if we say we're cutting things from AMAC, that doesn't mean, it's just administrators. But do we need to become more lean? Do we need to become more efficient? Yes, absolutely. And I think that, again, kind of that first piece of when I talked about philosophy of the board, I feel like that's part of what this plan is, right? Is a desire to take, 3 day schools that each have their own custodial, their own secretarial, their own, fill in the blank as far as what the support staff looks like, and put them under one roof, so to speak, so that we can be more efficient. That doesn't mean we're cutting positions. It just means we can be more efficient operationally in doing that. And so some of the investment that we may be asking voters to make is an investment in long-term efficiency, right? If that makes sense. So we can invest this one time because a day school has particular facility needs that other schools don't have. So as far as keeping kids safe and secure, keeping its staff safe and secure. So there's going to need to be some money to make it feasible and workable, but over the course of 20 years, we can save a lot of dollars operationally if we continue to head that direction, continue to get out from under some of these, if we have essentially 5 non-attendance center buildings in the district, the proposal is to cut 40% of those, right, to eliminate those buildings. There's a lot of detail to that, right? Dunbar has several offices and several roles that people play there. Same with ISC. There's several things to that. So it can't be turnkey overnight. We can't just say, okay, we're doing this, we're moving it all here. But I think the intention for me, and I believe that one of the things the board values is that making sure the money gets to the classroom, making sure we support teachers in the classroom so we can support strong academic outcomes. That's where the magic happens. I say it all the time, right? That's where learning occurs, is with teachers and kids in classrooms. So if we can find ways to be more efficient outside of that, we need to do that as much as we can. That isn't to say that, that means we may stop doing things, right? We all like programs. We all like the extra things that we're able to do. We saw that over ESSER. We were able to do a lot of extra things. The money's gone. We have to make decisions about what we're going to do and what we're not going to do. This would be in that same vein, right? We would have to start making decisions programmatically or situationally about this or that, or what do we prioritize. But I believe we can head a direction of continued efficiency, continue to look internally at what can we do to make our system more efficient, what can we do to make our outcomes better ultimately, and I feel like this plan can be a piece of that and really a foundation of that moving forward. So you also talked about learning outcomes, and I believe that I don't know if I've told this story to the board before publicly, but when I taught at Goddard a lot of years ago, 20 years ago, I was a traveling teacher. I was one of the teachers on a cart. So I was a CTE teacher and a tech lab and a language arts teacher. And eventually I'd ask, could I just teach all of my classes in the tech lab? So I taught language arts in a room we just had circular tables and chairs around the tables. There was no desks for rows. It changed the way I taught. The environment that I was put in as a teacher made me teach collaboratively. We did everything in projects. We did everything where kids were talking. Learning environments matter. And if we create a learning environment that's more conducive to project-based learning, to hands-on STEM learning, to collaboration, when we create those environments, it creates an ability to teach better and teach different. And I think we know that's a direction we need to head. A classroom that's 700 square feet is not conducive to the learning environment we need for today's learner. And so I think some of the drawings that Jeff has are inspirational and exciting to me, and I think we've seen that in some of our more recent builds at Enders and at Dodge and at Mueller, it does change. Some of those shared spaces do change the way that those kids learn and operate. And then if we can become more efficient and operationally, we can staff those in a more equitable way too. We've kind of talked about that. So it's all connected, but I think I answered the gist of your question or talked to most of it. So
Yeah, I believe so.
Okay.
Thank you for that. Just sharing some concerns. I do have concerns over the dollar amount and the total amount to be spent, because we have to weigh that fiscal responsibility, but we also know that the economy is hard and taxpayers are feeling a stretch and a burden, unlike times that we've seen recently. And so I also want to express that while I like the plan, I do wonder if there's ways to scale it back to meet the taxpayers' needs and be fiscally responsible in that. So that's my big concern. Another question that kind of just hit me while we were talking about, we've talked a lot about K through 8s and either building additions, changing some things around. Are we leaving behind current K-8s with the FCI scores that they have and not addressing some of their needs? So that's kind of a concern that dawned on me, that our K through 8s are not going to be more equitable or equal across the board with some of these changes. So that's another concern that I have, but I'm not asking for an answer right now. It's just a thought that I had.
If I could ask, are you wondering if our current K-8s are being invested in maintenance-wise? Or?
Yes, specifically like Horace Mann.
Okay.
It's an older building. And so I just don't want to I want to make sure that we're not investing in K-8s and then kind of saying, we already have one over here, and then not making that investment to make them more level across the board.
Horace Mann it is one of our better. I mean, it does still have maintenance needs, but in comparison to some of the ones we're talking about, it's in pretty good shape. So I definitely hear your concern, and it would definitely be one that I think we would get to in future steps of the plan. But the first step, we're trying to address the greatest needs first, I would say. And I will also say we initially looked at including more K-8s as part of the plan. And maybe that's something we work towards, but we kind of limited it a little bit just because the way our district is configured. We have, the way we're set up with elementaries and middle, it would have been a more significant challenge to move towards a really aggressive K-8 profile. It's to where I think we would have been talking about probably even higher dollar figures than what we're talking about with the current plan.
Okay, and my last question, I think this is getting a little bit into the weeds, but I want to honor the question that was asked, is we've talked about classroom size, and in this conversation it's been about square footage, but I know I've got a number of teachers that are concerned about the number of students when we talk about classroom size. And so it's been brought to my attention that, we've got a newcomers class, a newcomers program, and that actually has enrollment year-round. It's not just students that are enrolling in August and staying with us the whole year. We get newcomers throughout the year. And so can you speak to how we're going to make sure classroom sizes don't get to an excessive amount with programs specifically as the newcomers?
Sure. Yeah, I think in an overall sense, we monitor it all the time. And we made some adjustments last August. I think you guys are aware, where we moved some teachers before the school year started, but barely before the school year started, because we had, large class sizes in building X, and then this other building could give an allocation. Specifically to newcomers, though, we did some of that this year. I think it was a little bit. I don't want to speak at a turn, but the growth of newcomers this year was more than it had been in the past. So when we added, I believe it was at Washington, we moved a teacher from maybe Caldwell to Washington mid-year because they were at 35 in a class or something that is way, way out of what we want. So we relocated a teacher mid-year in order to accommodate that. That is not ideal. I mean, the teacher was gracious and wonderful, but it's not ideal to have to move teachers in the middle of the year. But I do think this year we should have a little bit better handle on that expected growth and how to manage that. But it happens. I mean, even through the course of our data collection for all the data we were using last, January and February about schools, we pulled the September 20th data for enrollment, and we have buildings that went from 300 to 350 from September 20th to January, right? I mean, that's kind of the normal course of what we do. So there's always a little bit of fluctuation in a general sense, but I think newcomer was more. Well, I know it was more than normal, or what we had been accustomed to in the past. So we did make some tweaks mid-year, but that's not ideal, right? That's never good, asking a teacher to pack their classroom in the middle of the year, and even especially newcomers that are unfamiliar with school in general. Oh, now you get Julie as your teacher, all of a sudden in the middle of something. So I hope next year we'll be able to be a little bit better
Okay.
equipped for that. And really, that particular issue is really aside from the bond, or the plan, or a step one, or whatever we want to call it.
Right, but
Yeah.
when we talk about classroom size, if I'm talking to a teacher, that's their next question, like every single time. So I want to make sure that we speak about that here, because that is their top concern.
And I agree, and I do think it's important to note that bigger square footage we are not equating that to more kids. You know what I mean?
Right, we're not putting more kids just because we have a larger
Right.
square footage
We
space.
we just believe that that's more conducive to the way we teach when we're doing centers and hands-on and all of the things that we expect teachers to do. They need more space to do that.
Okay,
In some of our buildings, I mean, not all of our buildings, but in some.
very good, thank you.
Yep.
Which again is a adaptation from my generation, where we just stuck a bunch of rows of desks and you listen to a teacher. We're learning today, we're trying to adjust, or we already have, but now we need the space to adjust better. Okay, we'll do the second round of questions, and and just remember that we'll also be discussing this a week from today at the special meeting. So you still have plenty of time if thoughts come to you or questions come to you after this is over. Hazel, do you have anything?
I do. So, it took our consultants, I think, was it 8 months to prepare this recommendation for us. And I hope as a board that we don't rush our decision to vote to accept this. I think that we need some time to be able to really evaluate how we can actually tweak this to serve our purpose in Wichita. So I hope that we're not having a rushed vote on this. The other thing that I'd like to talk about or ask a question about is that we haven't really discussed is we've been, all of us, kind of skirting around a bond. What has been the economic impact on Wichita as far as our past bonds are concerned? Has it been fruitful, where we've provided jobs and property values have increased? And I mean, I'm just wondering what the impact is if we know that.
Yeah, I think that is a great question. I don't know if you have any insight or any comment on that. Okay. I think there's some numbers that we could get that would help. And I've told several of you guys over the past week, we have more work to do as far as some of the budget projections and some of the cost savings and operational cost savings and things like that. We aren't there yet as far as having all those numbers for everybody, but we will. I think the economic impact is an important part of the conversation, that we have the ability to invest in our community, and that is people in our community getting invested in, right? That this work would be local, that this work would be people that live in the community, that could be a real benefit. But to quantify it with a number, I don't know that I could do that today, but we can definitely get back with you on some of that.
The part that I would add, thank you for that, is just it was before my time, the last time the bond was passed for the district, and I came in at the tail end of the 08 bond. But I've heard it said a number of times, and that when that 08 bond passed, that was right in that economic downturn of 08, 09, and if it weren't for that bond, our community would have been hurting pretty tremendously. A lot of our contractor businesses, in particular, and so that really kept a lot of folks' doors open. And not to say that that's the reason why we pass a bond, but it is absolutely a great thing for our community and for our local businesses. And that I want to be very clear about that, and that if this does happen, a focus would be getting this money back into our local businesses and our community.
Thank you, Hazel. Kathy?
I would like to echo Hazel again. Now I can talk about the bond, right? With all of the talent in our community and district, I think you've just said that it's going to be done locally. So if this does go through, our contractors, our laborers are all going to be local, correct?
I don't know that I could promise all.
What was the question again?
That the contractors, the construction workers, it's going to be local.
As
from
much
that
as we
pool.
can. I'm sorry.
Sorry.
As much as we can. There are certain services that
Yes.
they need to come from out of town. Usually we try to keep it Kansas City, as far
Right.
far away as they come from. But as much as possible.
Okay. I'm going to echo Diane also. I love the plan, but I am very concerned about asking our community for money right now. And like Hazel said, let's not rush into this. I mean, what is the sense of urgency? Why do we have to do this right away? I mean, can we wait a little bit? Can we afford to wait?
Well, I mean, again, that's a determination. I think when Susan shares, some of the estimates, I think in the next few weeks as far as budget goes, that's the role the board plays, is to set the mill levies and create a budget, right? But I think Luke also showed us that this waiting doesn't help solve the problems, right? I mean, we hired the consultant because we have issues that we need to address. To just wait on addressing those issues isn't going to get the issues addressed. So,
Correct.
Yeah. So, but I don't think there is a rush, and I think that there was a perception. I think that next week, man, we're pulling the trigger and we're going, and that is not the case, right? There isn't a rush to do that. With that said, we did ask Cooperative Strategies to meet this deadline. We knew this
Right.
June deadline was the deadline the whole time. So they met the deadline, which is what we asked them to do. So it isn't like, if it feels rushed, I think we should have all known that all along the way, that this was what we wanted them to do by the end of the month. So does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah.
And the city of Wichita receives grants. Does UST 259 ever receive grants? And if not, don't we have grant writers in the district that can begin going in that direction?
Well, I mean, my answer, and I don't know what Luke would say, I mean, to fund $450 million out of grants is just, that isn't possible, right?
It is impossible.
There's no way that we would ever get that amount of money through grants.
There's no way.
No, and a grant is, we applied for a grant that it was for our Future Ready centers that I thought we had a very good chance to get. It would have brought in $5 million over the next 3 years, and we didn't get it. So a grant is not a guarantee that I mean, we put a lot of work and time into that grant and we didn't get it. So I don't know that writing grants is a plan
Okay,
to
but
sustain us.
if I
that
can
makes
interrupt
sense.
you for a minute, I think if the community sees us trying to find resources elsewhere first before coming to them, they might be inclined to vote for it if they see that we're not just saying, okay, City of Wichita, you guys are just going to give us some money. We're going to just take it to a ballot. I think if they see that we're making efforts to finding more, like I said, more resources outside of a bond issue, they might be more inclined to help us.
Yeah, I do know, I don't want to speak out of turn about
Yeah,
the $20 million grant that we have applied for.
Just recently,
Yeah.
for energy improvements, 20-something sites. We're looking at upgrading lighting, potentially solar panels. I can't remember. Those are kind of the two key pieces of it. But you're limited in what you can accomplish with those grants usually. And like Kelly said, it's no guarantee.
But it's more than nothing.
But it's for energy efficient stuff specifically. But it does demonstrate that we're trying to get money from places as much as we can, and we absolutely are doing that, but it's not going to get us.
Well, and I think that the community needs to know that. This is the first I've heard about that. So I think it would behoove the district if we shared it with the community that, hey, we have written these grants for these specific things, and yes, we'll write a grant and see what we can get out of this. I really do think that if they see us making that effort, they might be a little bit more, less reluctant.
Well, and along that line, I think it's a great point. And I think along that line, next week we will have our opening kickoff breakfast for the WPS Foundation, right? We're looking to start a foundation as another revenue source to help kids. The foundation's not going to build any buildings or do any deferred maintenance or any of that. That's not the mission of it. But I do think we need to look at all different funding sources to make sure we're being good stewards of the dollars, and that's just one other way that we're going to do it to help fill gaps that the district can't afford at this point.
And do you offhand know how many people live in the city of Wichita? Do you know offhand what the population is?
No.
300,000?
It's around that, I think.
So if 300,000 people gave $5, that would hit it.
That would.
And we wouldn't even need to ask for a bond issue.
Well, no.
Well.
I mean, 300,000 times 5 isn't 450 million.
Well, we can get there somehow. But I mean, if somebody could give like a one-time donation of, I'm just picking things out so it doesn't have to go to a bond issue. I'm just thinking outside of the box.
Yeah.
I'll think of anything to prevent a bond, even if it's silly. I will.
Oh, thank you, Kathy. Melody?
Yes, I do have a couple of additional questions. So the first one is understanding that understanding that secure entrance was a priority for the district. Are the buildings that do not have secured entrance built yet, are they included in the master plan and the budgeting that we're looking at?
Yeah, good question. Off the top of my head, we had paused on a couple to see what the master plan was going to show. Really, everything that we're keeping beyond, I want to tell you, I don't think we have any that are held up at this point. There might be one or two exceptions. I might have to get back with you on that on the 27th. But all that we want to be, even though we knew that some of these buildings we might be getting out of in 3 years or so, we wanted to make sure we were still honoring that commitment to the public and providing those secure entrances. So we did not hold up any of the sites. There were just, like I said, there were just a handful that, I'm sorry, I don't have that off the top of my head, but I'll get it to you.
But the answer that are you stating that they will be done?
Yes,
It's already budgeted?
yes.
Okay, I needed to make sure I understood that. And so, Mr. President, when we come back next week, I know that we're going to be talking about budgeting this. We're going to be talking about the potential for a bond issue. I have some questions. Should I just shoot those over to our CEO of Finance?
Yes, you can do that at any time. You can ask questions at any time. It doesn't have to be at a specific board meeting. And then obviously follow it up at a public meeting too. And then my understanding is next week is going to touch on the budgeting aspect of this plan. Is that correct?
With Susan? Will Susan will be there on the 27th?
No.
No.
The budgeting aspect of the
Okay.
of the facility master plan won't be what Susan, she's going to present on mill rates.
Okay.
Revenue
Okay.
neutral for fiscal year 25.
For fiscal,
So we haven't even
Oh.
decided whether, and I do think that would be an important kind of discussion for next week. Do we want to, regardless of the size of a bond issue, do we want to give Luke, yes, we're going to do something with the bond issue, or no, absolutely not, because that impacts kind of our planning. If the will of the board is, yes, we still have concerns or questions about what the plan is, but we want to at some point over the next year look at a bond issue that will help us for planning. If it's, the will of the board is absolutely not, we have no interest in that, then that gives us one direction. But we won't talk about the funding of the bond yet, as far as Susan goes. Is that, I'm looking at Susan, is that
oh, okay.
whatever we ask her to do, I guess?
So there won't, I know you said mill rates for 2025. I think do we already know that, though? Do we already have that information of what our, okay, so, but it's going to be based on what our budget is.
Yes.
Okay, so if we're looking at a potential for a bond issue, which I know will be separate, it's a separate tranche, but shouldn't we be discussing that? I think they're correlated to, they correlate to each other.
Yeah, yes. The answer is yes to
Okay.
that question. They will be correlated and will be part of the discussion. I guess what I thought you were asking was, is Susan going to say we're doing a $450 million bond
No.
issue or a $300 million or
Yeah.
whatever, and that isn't part of what her.
Right.
We're not there yet.
No,
if that
no.
helps.
My-
Is that-
My question actually has to do with a document that I believe was discussed in 2023 that actually shows potential mill levies.
Yes.
So that, I'm just kind of forecasting for
Yep.
Susan that those are going to be some questions, and I'll probably actually
And-
chat with her
and-
before.
Yes, that'd be good.
Okay,
Yep,
very good.
right
Thank
on.
you.
Thank you, Melody. Julie?
Yeah, I just have a few more thoughts
Yeah.
after everyone has spoken.
Go ahead. That's
my-
what this second round's for.
Yeah, my first one is I just want to reemphasize something that Superintendent Bielefeld said. And it does relate to funding in our district, but I think it's one of those things that the public, and maybe not even the school board, and maybe not even employees in the school district understand, and that is our Kansas school finance formula is not set up to keep up or tackle our deferred maintenance issues. No matter how efficient we are, no matter how budget conscious we are, there is not the funding available to Kansas schools to keep up with all of the maintenance and school improvement needs. So I just want to throw that out. You made the comment, but I just want to emphasize that because that's just a fact of living in the state of Kansas.
And I want to bring us back to our board-approved vision. Our desire is to be the district of choice for the region, right? Our desire is to be the district that people choose, and those things are connected. High-quality facilities are something that other districts have, and they've passed several bond issues since 2008 that we haven't passed. So if we want to be the district of choice, if that's our priority and that's our vision and that's what we've articulated, then I think that there's things that follow. Now, how quickly we move toward that, right? I mean, that's where we have a discussion, but I do think there's something to be said for if that's who we want to be, then we have to make decisions and investments in order to support that.
Secondly, one of the things, it's It's a detail, but one of the things that's a part of the plan that will answer the student achievement question is the fact that on our rebuilds, we're attempting to build the new facility on the site at a location that does not disrupt the learning in the existing facility that's on site. We can continue to have maximum learning and maximum student achievement for that building, and then move the kids over to the new one, and then tear down the old one, which again is the least disruptive way to do school improvements to student learning. Just throwing it out there.
With the one exception, just to make sure that Irving Elementary would be the one we,
Well, and potentially Adams will have to
Potentially Adams,
move kids first
Right.
and then build on the site
Yep.
and tear down the old building and then move kids back.
Yep.
But they still wouldn't have to live with construction happening at their right elbow like we had to do in past bonds.
yes, that's true.
I had a question from the community, and nothing has been said about this at all. This is a question for you, Superintendent. I had a question relative to, do we have the same concern about people over places in the schools that are consolidated, shuttered, closed, however you want to name it? The teachers that are in those buildings, is the intention that all of those employees will be honored jobs as those buildings are closed?
Great question, and yes, absolutely. And I think our hope would be, depending on the final version of the plan, depending on the timeline of how we do it, there would be a lot more opportunity for teachers to stay together and stay connected with students as we consolidate and move, right? The unfortunate part and really the hardest gut-wrenching part of what happened over the course of the spring was, kind of this disbursement of teachers and students and that loss of connection, and that's really, really hard for our kids. And so I think, if you look at, Building X is consolidating and it's going to go into Y and Z. Well, Y and Z are going to be bigger buildings that are going to need staff, and so there'll be much more of an opportunity to relocate them. But I don't have any doubt that in any of these consolidations, the intention isn't at all to eliminate people, right? Positions might get eliminated through attrition, but I don't think we still continue to have some vacancies. Way fewer, but even for next year, even with what we did. So yeah, I don't see a future where we would need, or we couldn't commit to that. So yeah, good question.
Thank
though.
you.
Thank you, Julie. Diane, do you have a second round? Okay.
Kelly, if you would like to recap what comes next, and I think we've already made it clear that this plan is not being formally adopted next week, but it'd probably be good for the public to understand or know what this timetable is from here.
Yeah, go for it.
Can I real quick? I just want to go back to Melody's question that she had asked earlier about the secured entrances. I was able to pull that up. And the few that we did put on hold that are part of this plan would be Leoviture, Gateway, and Chester Lewis. And between those three, we're probably looking at several $1 million in order to add controlled access entrances to those buildings. So that was why it was put on hold, knowing that they'd be impacted by step one if it's accepted, wanting to be, responsible with our money and not make big changes and improvements to these buildings if we're going to end up closing them. So I think on the 27th, when we know more about the sequencing of the plan, is probably when we need to make the decision of, if we would plan to get out of these buildings within the next year or two, maybe we don't do those projects, but if it's going to be later on in the plan, then maybe we still do. That's kind of the tough balance of this work. But if the board feels that that's something we should move forward with, we absolutely can. But that was the thought process and why we put those on pause. And if you ask Terry Moses, she would tell you that all of our buildings have secured entrances. This is just a matter of adding an additional controlled access to the fronts of our buildings. So.
So the only follow-up that I would have is that I'd love for, when will that come to us again? When will that decision be made in terms of timeline? So that we know the impact,
The
potential
sequencing
impact.
timeline?
Correct.
They plan on bringing that on the 27th to present as part of the final plan.
So we'll know at that time the approximate date of when we would start construction, because and have to work with moving the students
Right.
and making sure that,
Which buildings we would foresee being kind of the first to consolidate
Correct.
as we build new and move kids in, and yeah.
correct. And all of the receiving buildings that we've mentioned, they do have secured entrances
Yes.
that any of those buildings would
Yes.
consolidate into. I'm thinking of the Lou Overture.
And they all have secured entrances. This is just a double level.
Yeah. Yeah.
The-
So, yeah.
The other one would be Jardine, that if we do this plan, we held on that one too, and so we would have to figure that out too.
Okay, so there is a fourth.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
that'd be just part of the wholesale renovations we
Right.
do at that building.
But
All right.
but we might do it differently because we're using the building differently than what we had originally proposed. So anyway.
That's true.
Yep.
Thank you. That was a question that had been asked. I needed to know.
Welcome.
You
I'm good.
Okay. So what's next? Where we go from here? Community feedback is what's next, right? We'll get the results of the survey, and they'll be presented to you guys as a board next Thursday, and we'll see what that says. If there's particular parts of the plan that people really like, people really don't, et cetera, et cetera. And we did ask questions about bond on that, and not numbers again, but just overall, are you likely to support, not likely to support, that sort of thing. Then Luke already gave you a little bit of an overview of what else we'll get. We'll get a timeline, we'll get an overall map. And then I think it's important for the board really to begin, building consensus around priorities, right? I know we've heard 6 different opinions today, and there's a 7th opinion that we'll be back next week. And so, what can we all agree to as far as we value? What are the things that are most essential to this? And maybe it's we end up agreeing that this is the plan, we love it, we'll move it forward. But if we're going to make adjustments to the plan, what do we value? So what do we keep as far as that value, and what do we? A lot of these things I think are more about when, not if. There's some ifs in here. There's some optional things, probably the smaller things. The Future Ready Center for Trades, that we could not do that if we wanted to. But maybe we want to start smaller and go, be able to do some things quicker, and then, move to step 1A and step 1B or something like. I'm just making things up. So I think that's really what I'll need from you all is, what do we agree to as far as our priorities? What do we value most? And then what can we get behind as far as support for this? And I think once we have that, then we can talk timeline and when, if we want to move a bond issue forward, when do we want to have a vote? What are the implications, all of that. So hopefully those decisions kind of land in July, so that by August we have what we feel like is a pretty firm plan that we can move forward, along with a timetable for what it looks like for the community. So, and again, that's kind of Kelly's version of things. I have heard, I think there is a consensus that maybe we slow down just a little bit, make sure we have a really good plan in place. I think we're all in agreement of that. So I think that's what we do in July, and then create a game plan for there. So if that sounds great to everybody, I think that's where we're at.
That is, what will the format of the responses from the survey be? And will we be able, as a board, will we be able to access that before we come back together? I think that input is huge. I think it's very important. So, yeah, what's the format?
I can get that information to you by,
Okay.
I'll get it to you tomorrow in my memo, but
Okay.
I don't know the answer to that, to be honest.
Oh.
So,
All
it,
right.
it closes today, so I would imagine we would have something pretty early next week, I would guess. So, and it was only, I think it was 5 questions, so it was pretty straightforward, so.
Right, but I mean, when I say format, will we get it in, yeah, help me.
Typically, in the past, and I'm not saying this is what staff is committed to do, but just historically, they've given us a summary of the results, and then they give us a printout of all of the individual answers.
That's what I
So-
needed to know.
So you can look through and read all of them,
I'd
and then
like
you
to.
also have the summary to.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
Yeah, I think we're good.
Oh, all right, thank you. And I really think what we're at the process now is that what matters to each of us as we try to build a consensus combined with what the public wants is the process of turning this consultant plan into as I said earlier, a unique Wichita plan. So I appreciate everyone's time and attention today, and we will see you next Thursday at noon.
Yes, noon in here.
Yes, noon in this room. Thank you. At noon, because North is still doing some construction.